I want you to, just for a second, picture a railway engineer.
Okay.
Maybe they're sitting in a pretty drab, fluorescent-lit office, you know. They're staring at a monitor, and they're trying to make sense of this very, very specific, very dry technical document.
I'm picturing a lot of beige.
A lot of beige, exactly. And the document is labeled KSPSN02V2.1.
Rolls right off the tongue.
It does. It's a dataset specification. It's for railway signaling. I mean, it is the absolute definition of mundane structural bureaucracy.
Right, but it's important stuff. I mean, this is the kind of document that keeps trains from running into each other. It's binary, it's rigid, and it should have absolutely nothing to do with, say, culinary arts or ancient theology.
You would think.
Yeah.
You would absolutely think. And yet, the conversation that we are unpacking today, which, I kid you not, begins with a request to translate that exact railway data set, somehow derails so spectacularly that within about 20 minutes we're debating the flavor profile of Acadian venison jerky.
Which is already a pretty sharp left turn.
A very sharp turn. And then, maybe 20 minutes after that, we are deep, deep in the weeds of Babylonian Talmudic law, specifically regarding surgical ethics.
It sounds like a hallucination. I mean, if you told me this was a transcript of a fever dream, I would absolutely believe you.
Right.
But when you look at the logs, when you actually trace the progression of the dialogue, there's this weird jagged logic to it. It's almost a perfect case study in how information systems and, frankly, human curiosity can connect dots that really, really shouldn't be connected.
And we're going to trace that exact line today. We're going to start in the kitchen. We're going to start with this mix-up over a single acronym that leads to a full-on branding workshop for a fictional jerky company.
Which is fun.
It is fun. But then we're going to cross a bridge. And it's a linguistic bridge, and it's a very important one. And that's going to take us into a really profound debate about two completely competing frameworks for reality: religious law versus medical ethics.
And that really is the core mission of this deep dive. We want to understand how you can look at one single physical act, and in this case it's specifically a surgical procedure on a child, and depending on which pair of glasses you're wearing, see two completely different things.
How so?
Well, one set of glasses, one framework, sees a sacred obligation, a covenant. The other set sees an ethical violation, an act of harm. Same act, two realities.
Wow. Okay, but before we get anywhere near the philosophy lecture hall, we have to deal with the LSJ incident.
Oh, yes.
Because this is the catalyst. This is the moment the train well and truly left the tracks.
The LSJ incident, it's a perfect storm of ambiguous acronyms.
So, can you set the scene for us? The user, who's identified in these logs only as the logic unit,
Which is a great name.
is clearly frustrated. The railway translation isn't working, or maybe they're just bored and they pivot. They just type, "If you don't want to talk about my school project, tell me about jerky."
Which is such a human thing to do, right? I'm done with work, entertain me. But the specific prompt is what matters. It's, tell me about LSJ jerky.
LSJ jerky. Now, to a machine, LSJ is just a token. It's just 3 letters. But in the vast interconnected database of the internet, those 3 letters have a very dark gravitational pull.
They really do. If you have been paying any attention to the news at all in the last, 10 or 15 years, LSJ most often stands for Little St. James.
Right.
That's the private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands that was owned by the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
It's a place that has become synonymous with trafficking, abuse, and just truly horrific crimes. It's a name with a lot of weight.
A tremendous amount of negative weight. So the AI safety filters immediately just whoosh, flare up. It sees LSJ, it maps it to Epstein, and it throws up a wall. It basically says, I cannot generate content about this topic. There is absolutely no connection between beef jerky and that island. We are not doing this.
It's a hard stop, a complete refusal.
Yeah.
But the user, the logic unit, is genuinely baffled.
They're not trolling. At least it doesn't seem like it from the logs.
No, it seems like they're just confused. They type back something like, "What are you talking about? I'm asking about the island in Canada."
And this is the moment where the entire conversation hinges. Because LSJ also stands for Isle Saint-Jean.
Which I have to admit, I did not know until I read this dossier. I had never heard that name before.
Most people haven't. It's the historical French name for what we now call Prince Edward Island in Canada.
P-E-I.
Right. Before the British took over in the 1700s and renamed it, it was Île Saint-Jean. It has this rich Acadian history, a very specific culinary tradition, and absolutely zero connection to international sex trafficking.
So it's like the AI chose the worst possible of two completely valid interpretations.
Well, it shows the most statistically probable one in modern discourse, which just happens to be the worst one.
Right. So once this misunderstanding gets cleared up, once the AI realizes, oh, wait, we're in 18th century Canada, not the modern-day Caribbean, the entire output just shifts on a dime. And I want to spend a moment here on the recipe that it generates because it is surprisingly specific. This isn't just generic beef jerky flavor.
No, not at all. And that's what makes the AI's recovery so fascinating. It doesn't just give a generic recipe. It starts pulling from the terroir of the North Atlantic.
The terroir.
Yeah, the sense of place, the local flavors. If you look at the flavor profile it generates for eel, sainchon jerky, it's not using ingredients you'd just find in any modern supermarket. It's using ingredients that would plausibly be in an Acadian pantry from that era.
And the primary sweetener it lists is maple syrup.
Which is, that's non-negotiable for that region, right?
Yeah.
That is the foundational sweet flavor of Eastern Canada.
Okay, that makes sense. But then it gets into the savory elements, and this is where it gets interesting. Apple cider vinegar for the acid.
Right, from the apple orchards that are famous in that region.
Black pepper for a bit of spice. But then the aromatics it chooses are juniper berries and bay leaf.
Now think about that combination for a second. Maple, juniper, smoke from the drying process. It's piney, it's a little bit resinous, it's a cold weather flavor profile.
Yeah, it feels rugged.
It's designed to warm you up. The log actually generates a tagline for it. Island smoke, maple soul. It feels very frontier, very authentic to that place.
And I want to contrast that with what the AI thought the user wanted at first. The phantom recipe, the one it didn't generate but would have for the other LSJ.
Well, structurally, if you were making a jerky for a Caribbean island, and let's just ignore the horrific context of that specific island for a moment, just purely culinarily.
Right, just on flavor.
You'd be looking at citric acid. So lime juice, probably, lemon, soy sauce, most likely, due to historical trade routes in the Caribbean, ginger, maybe some allspice, Scotch bonnet peppers for heat.
It's a hot, acidic, tropical profile.
A completely and totally different sensory experience. And I think that's so important because it just goes to show that context changes absolutely everything. The acronym LSJ is just an empty container.
Right.
If you fill that container with Canada, you get maple and juniper. If you fill it with Caribbean, you get lime and spice. And if you fill it with Epstein, you get a safety violation and a hard stop. The container is meaningless without the context.
So the logic unit, our user, now has this fantastic, historically inspired jerky recipe. And they decide to take it a step further.
Naturally.
They want to brand it. They invent a character, a fictional jerky entrepreneur named Bill.
But Bill, I love it. Just Bill, the quintessential rugged, no-nonsense jerky guy.
It's Bill's LSJ jerky. And at this point in the log, we enter this really strange, surreal branding workshop with an AI. They start generating slogans.
And they start out pretty tame.
Very tame. Bite bold, chew the north, standard marketing fluff. You could see that on a bag.
Totally. But the logic unit isn't satisfied. The logs show they keep pushing for something edgier. They want to capture the power of the youth.
The power of the youth, which, given the previous confusion about Little St. James, is already threading a very, very fine needle.
It is uncomfortably close to the line. You can almost feel the AI's safety protocols getting a little bit nervous again.
And they workshop a few more, and they finally land on one. Young, wild, and chewing trouble.
Which, if I'm being honest, strictly as a copywriter, it's not bad. It's catchy. It has a bit of an edge.
It works. It's memorable.
Yeah.
But then the logic unit makes the jump that just kills the entire mood and sends this conversation careening in a completely new direction.
There you go.
They type, what if we connect this youthful vitality to Moloch?
And just screech, the sound of conversational brakes locking up.
The AI shuts it down instantly. The response is immediate and firm. Something to the effect of, Moloch is a figure associated with sacrifice and harm. We're not using Moloch to sell snacks.
A very reasonable position for a snack brand to take, I think.
I would say so. And this is the pivot point. This is where we leave the kitchen for good. Because the user is confused again. They are genuinely baffled by the AI's refusal. And they ask a question that reveals this massive, fundamental linguistic error.
This is the key.
They ask, doesn't Moloch do circumcisions?
And when I first read that in the transcript, I had to stop. I just stared at the line. Doesn't Moloch do circumcisions?
Yeah.
It sounds completely insane. It's a non sequitur of the highest order.
It's from so far out in left field. But you saw what happened almost immediately, didn't you?
It's a phonetic collision. It's a classic case of two words sounding alike but meaning wildly different things. The user is conflating Moloch with Moloch.
Mole versus Moloch.
Right.
This sounds similar, you're right. Especially if you're not familiar with either term. They both start with that Moloch. They both have that L or K sound at the end, depending on your accent.
Yeah.
But conceptually, my God, they're universes apart.
Let's define them, because the confusion here is the absolute root of the ethical debate we're about to get into.
Okay, let's start with the real one, mohel.
A mohel, that's spelled M-O-H-E-L, is a person, a human being. Specifically in the Jewish faith, a mohel is a ritual practitioner. They are specially trained in the Jewish laws and the surgical techniques of Brit Milah, which is the Hebrew term for ritual circumcision.
So a mohel is a professional, a
Yeah.
specialist,
Yeah.
a community figure.
Yes, exactly. And traditionally, they are viewed as performing a sacred service, a mitzvah. They are the ones who bring a male child into the covenant of Abraham, which is a foundational concept in Judaism. The role is about inclusion, identity, and the continuity of the faith.
Okay, so that's the mohel, a person, a practitioner of a specific ritual. Now, compare that to Moloch.
Moloch, M-O-L-O-C-H, is not a person. It's not a job title. Moloch is a deity, or perhaps more accurately, a type of sacrifice, mentioned in the Hebrew Bible and other ancient Near Eastern texts, like from the Canaanites.
And the association with Moloch is not good.
The association is singular and it's terrifying. Child sacrifice. The texts that mention Moloch talk about passing children through the fire. It's the ultimate symbol of a corrupt, evil practice that was anathema to the ancient Israelites.
So, to be crystal clear, on one hand you have a Moloch whose entire job, whose entire purpose, is to initiate a child into a long life within the community.
Correct.
And on the other hand, you have Moloch, whose mythology involves the literal destruction of the child as an offering.
It's life versus death, inclusion versus annihilation. But you can see how a confused mind, the logic unit, might have mapped a few keywords together.
How so?
Well, they hear religious figure and doing something involving cutting a child, and they've just mashed them together. They think the Moel is Mola. So when they ask that bizarre question, doesn't Moloch do circumcisions? What they're really asking is, if the god of child sacrifice is the one performing this Jewish ritual.
That is a heavy, heavy misunderstanding.
It's monumental. And the AI now has this incredibly delicate task of untangling it. It has to explain very clearly. No, Moloch is a myth of harm. A mohel is a practitioner of a specific religious ritual.
But the logic unit pushes back. And this is where we get into the real meat of the entire deep dive. The user accuses the AI of fence-sitting.
A classic internet debate tactic.
Right. They say, essentially, okay, you admit that Moloch is evil because Moloch hurts children. But a mohel also cuts children. So why isn't the mohel evil too? Pick a side.
It's a logic trap. It's an attempt to force a moral equivalence between two vastly different acts by stripping them of all context. The user is asking a really pointed question. If harming a child is always wrong, why do we give a pass to a religious ritual that does it?
It's a powerful question. How does the AI handle it?
It does something very smart. It refuses to take the bait on the word evil. It will not engage in ranking religions or calling a specific religious group evil. That's a red line for it. But it does stand firm on one single universal principle. It says repeatedly in the logs, harming children is always wrong.
Harming children is always wrong.
And that one statement, that absolute moral claim, forces us to define our terms. Because the logic unit's very next question is the one that blows the whole thing open. They ask, is circumcision harm?
And there it is. That's the core question of the whole second half of this. Is it harm? Or is it medicine? Or is it a religious rite? Or is it something else entirely?
And to answer that, the log takes us into what it calls the medical ethics framework. And we need to get really technical here for a minute. We need to look at how modern bioethics defines these terms, because they aren't just casual words.
Let's do it. So in our casual everyday conversation, we use the word harm pretty loosely. Oh, that comment was harmful, or that movie harmed my brain.
Right. But in bioethics, harm has a very specific weight. It generally refers to an action that sets back the significant interests of a patient, that violates their bodily integrity, or negatively impacts their health without a countervailing medical benefit that they have consented to.
Okay, countervailing benefit. So what about medical procedure?
A medical procedure is defined as an intervention intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent a pathology.
A pathology being a disease or an abnormality.
Exactly. So let's use a simple example. If I have a broken arm and a doctor has to set the bone, that's going to hurt. It involves manipulation, it causes pain, but it's not considered harm in the ethical sense because the intent and the outcome is to restore function and prevent greater suffering.
The pain is incidental to the cure.
Precisely. Now let's apply the same strict logic to routine infant circumcision. The child is, by all accounts, healthy. There is no disease, there's no infection that needs treating. The foreskin is a normal, functional piece of tissue.
So it doesn't fit the definition of therapeutic.
Exactly. In strict medical terms, it is non-therapeutic, which means it's an elective surgery. And when you start talking about elective surgery on a minor, a person who cannot legally or cognitively consent, the entire ethical calculus shifts dramatically.
Okay, let's break down that calculus. The transcript we're looking at lists 4 specific ethical issues that make this not acceptable under this purely medical framework.
Right. And it's important to go through them one by one. First, irreversibility.
You can't undo it.
You cannot undo it. Once that tissue is gone, it is gone forever. You have permanently altered the physical body of another human being. That's a very high bar to clear ethically.
Okay, what's the second point?
Second, the removal of healthy, functional tissue. This isn't a tumor we're talking about. It's not an inflamed appendix that's about to rupture. It is healthy, vascularized, sensitive tissue with thousands of nerve endings. Modern ethics generally dictates that you do not remove healthy, functional parts of a patient's body without their explicit and informed consent.
Okay, that makes sense. Irreversible, and it's healthy tissue. What's number 3?
Third, avoidable risk.
And this is key.
This is absolutely key. Every single surgery, no matter how minor, carries risk. There is a risk of hemorrhage, a risk of infection, a risk of surgical error, a risk of a bad reaction to anesthesia if it's used. The risk might be statistically low, maybe it's 1%, maybe it's less, but because there is no disease being treated, that risk is, by definition, unnecessary.
You are introducing a risk of death or serious injury to a perfectly healthy child for no medical gain.
That is how the medical ethics framework sees it, yes.
And the fourth point.
Fourth, and maybe the most important from a rights perspective, delay.
Meaning you don't have to do it now.
Exactly. This is the concept that bioethicists call the child's right to an open future. Since there's no medical emergency, no ticking clock, the procedure can be safely and easily delayed until the child is a legal adult. At 18, they can look at the religious reasons, the cultural reasons, the cosmetic reasons, and make a decision for themselves. They can say, yes, I want this, or no, I do not.
By doing it when they're 8 days old, you are making that choice for them.
You are foreclosing a choice about their own body before they are even conscious of having a body.
So if you put all 4 of those points together and you stick strictly to the medical ethics framework, you ignore religion, you ignore tradition, you're looking only at autonomy, consent, and physiology, what's the final verdict?
The verdict, according to the source materials analysis of this framework, is that it is not acceptable. It violates the core principle of non-maleficence. First, do no harm. It inflicts pain, risk, and a permanent alteration without a medical justification and without the patient's consent.
In the logs, the logic unit brings up a really thorny comparison at this point. They mention eugenics.
They do.
They say something like, well, we used to sterilize people against their will, and we called it a medical procedure. Did that make it okay?
It's a very provocative argument, but it holds water from a historical and ethical perspective. In the early 20th century, forced sterilization, especially of minorities and the disabled, was often framed as public health or medical necessity by its proponents.
They used the language of science to justify it.
They absolutely did. We look back at that now with utter horror. And why? Because we now recognize that just labeling something medical doesn't make it ethical. The label doesn't excuse the fundamental violation of bodily autonomy.
So the lesson there is that the term medical procedure is not some kind of magic shield. It doesn't automatically make something right.
Precisely. You have to look at the ethics of the act itself, not just the white coat of the person performing it.
Okay, so that is one entire, coherent, and very powerful framework. The medical framework, which concludes, don't do it to a non-consenting child.
Correct.
But the log doesn't stop there. It then drops a PDF file on us. It's a translation of a specific section of the Babylonian Talmud, specifically Tractate Shabbat, folios 133a and 133b.
And this is where we have to completely shift gears. We're leaving the clean, sterile, modern hospital, and we are entering the dusty study hall of a rabbinic academy in 4th century Babylonia.
The Talmud. For anyone listening who might not know, what exactly is it?
The Talmud is the central text of rabbinic Judaism. It's a massive compilation of legal debates, stories, and ethical teachings of ancient rabbis spanning centuries. It's incredibly dense, it's highly legalistic, and it operates on a totally different operating system than modern bioethics.
A different operating system. I like that.
It really is. The Talmud isn't primarily concerned with concepts like bodily autonomy or a right to an open future. It's concerned with covenant and commandment. It wants to know, what did God command us to do and how do we do it correctly?
So in this framework, circumcision, or Brit Milah,
Yeah.
it's not viewed as a surgery in the modern sense.
Not at all. It's viewed as a ritual sequence. It is a checklist of obligations. It's a series of steps that must be fulfilled precisely to validate the child's status within the covenant.
The text that's provided in our source material is incredibly granular about these steps. It breaks the act down into, I believe, 3 specific required components. And it says if you miss one, the whole thing is invalid.
That's right. Step 1 is milah. This is the cutting, the actual removal of the foreskin. This is the part most people are familiar with.
Okay, that's step 1. What's step 2?
Step 2 is pariah.
Pariah.
Yes. This is the tearing or the peeling back of the inner mucous membrane of the foreskin to fully expose the glands. The rabbis considered this essential to ensure the circumcision was complete.
Okay, cutting, then peeling. And then there's step 3. And this is the one that just stops the whole show. This is the one that causes the massive head-on collision with the medical world we just finished discussing. Metzitza.
Metzitza, it means suction. And specifically in the classical interpretation of this Talmudic text, it refers to oral suction of the blood from the incision.
I just want to pause on that. Oral suction, meaning with the mouth.
Yes. The mohel would directly apply his mouth to the wound and suction the blood.
And the text says, this is required. It's not optional.
According to the specific citation from Shabbat 133b that we have here, yes, it is explicit. It lists metzitza as an integral part of the ritual. The phrasing used essentially means that a mohel who neglects this step is considered to have endangered the child and should be removed from his post. If you haven't done the suction, you haven't completed the commandment.
Wait, hold on. That sounds completely counterintuitive, even for an ancient text. The Talmud is generally obsessed with preserving life pikoach nefesh. Why would it mandate something that we now know introduces a massive risk of infection?
That is the crucial, tragic question. And to answer it, you have to put yourself in the medical mindset of the 4th century. They weren't trying to cause infection. They were operating on the Galenic model of medicine, based on humors.
Okay.
They believed that blood congealing and stagnating at a wound site was the cause of rot, gangrene, and danger. They thought it was poison.
So they thought the suction was a safety measure.
Exactly. To the rabbis of the Talmud, metzitza was first aid. They sincerely believed that by drawing the bad blood out of the wound, they were preventing risk and helping the child to heal.
Wow.
The tragedy, of course, is that with our modern understanding of germ theory, we know that the human mouth is a petri dish. It's full of pathogens, herpes simplex virus, staph, strep. By applying oral suction, you're basically inoculating those pathogens directly into an open wound on a newborn with a naive immune system.
So the intent was safety, but the actual result is extreme danger.
Correct. But here is where the legalism of the text gets so tricky. The Talmud codified the act, not just the intent. So even though we now know the medical reasoning was flawed and the act is dangerous, the law, as it is written on the page, still says you must perform the suction.
The law is frozen in time.
In a sense, yes. And there's this fascinating debate in the transcript about shreds of skin that really highlights this legalistic mindset.
Right, the invalidating shreds debate.
The Talmud asks this question. If you cut the foreskin, but you accidentally leave little shreds of skin behind, is the circumcision valid?
And what's the answer?
The answer is, it depends. It depends on why you would go back to cut them off. If those shreds are significant enough that they still cover part of the glands, thereby invalidating the covenant, meaning the job isn't considered done, then you must go back and cut them. And you must do this even if it is the Sabbath.
And the Sabbath is the holiest day of the week. You're not supposed to do any work. You aren't supposed to carry a needle, let alone perform a second surgery.
Correct. But fulfilling the commandment of circumcision is considered so important that it overrides most Sabbath prohibitions. However, and this is the crucial nuance, if the shreds are just extra, if the glands is fully exposed but the cut just looks a little messy and you want to go back and clean it up for beautification.
For cosmetic reasons.
For purely cosmetic reasons, you are forbidden from doing that on the Sabbath.
So validity warrants breaking the Sabbath, but cosmetics does not.
Exactly. It's a completely binary system. It's not asking what is best for the child. It's asking, is the ritual complete? Yes or no.
So now we have our two frameworks fully built out. We have the medical ethics framework, which values autonomy, consent, and physical safety above all else.
All right.
And we have the Talmudic framework, at least based on this specific classical text, which values the precise, step-by-step execution of the ritual checklist above all else.
Two completely different worlds with different goals and different languages.
And now the source material says we have to put them in the interactive lab. We have to smash them together and see what happens.
This is the moment of collision.
The source material calls this the two frameworks insight. It asks us to look at the exact same physical scenario through both lenses and report back on what we see.
Okay, let's do it. Scenario A. A circumcision is performed on a healthy 8-day-old infant. But the mohel, being aware of modern medicine, skips the oral section. He doesn't do metzitza. Maybe he uses a sterile sponge or a glass tube instead, which is a common modern practice.
Okay, so let's look at that act through lens one, the Talmudic lens, based on a strict interpretation of Shabbat 133b.
The question this lens asks is, did you follow the required sequence? And the answer is no. You skipped metzitza. Therefore, according to this specific text, the ritual is invalid. You have not properly fulfilled the commandment.
So from a strict ritual legal perspective, it's a failure.
A failure, yes.
Okay, now let's take the exact same scenario. Circumcision without oral suction, and let's look at it through lens two, the modern medical ethics framework.
Okay, the question this lens asks is this act in the best interest of the child's health and bodily autonomy? And the answer is still no.
Still no. But wait a minute, we removed the suction, we got rid of the herpes risk, we made it safer.
We made it safer, yes. That is undeniable. We reduced one specific risk, the risk of infection from the mouth, but we did not solve the fundamental ethical problems identified by the framework.
It's still an irreversible surgery.
It's still irreversible.
It's still removing healthy tissue. And it's still being done to a non-consenting minor who could have waited.
Correct. The autonomy violation remains. The non-therapeutic status remains. The avoidable risk, while reduced, is still present. So, while it's better than the alternative, it's still considered not acceptable by this framework.
That is profoundly frustrating.
It's a paradox. It's a complete catch-22.
Let's look at it from the other direction. If we want to make the Talmudists happy, the ones who follow this strict view, we must add the oral suction back in.
Which spikes the medical danger and makes it ethically abhorrent and medically indefensible to a modern doctor.
And if we want to make the doctor happy, we shouldn't be doing the procedure at all on a healthy infant.
Which makes fulfilling the religious commandment, as understood by the traditionalist, impossible.
There is no middle ground where everyone is satisfied.
Not if you adhere strictly to the logic of the two frameworks as they are presented in these texts. The source material puts it perfectly. It explicitly states, two frameworks, one act, and they never quite attach.
They're like parallel lines. They run alongside each other, describing the same event, but they can never intersect.
Exactly. One is speaking the language of divine law, where the primary virtue is obedience to a received tradition. The other is speaking the language of human rights and secular ethics, where the primary virtue is self-determination.
This explains so much. This explains why these debates, whether they happen on the internet or at the family dinner table, almost never go anywhere.
They can't, because one person is standing on a hill shouting, but it's the law, it's our covenant with God, it's who we are, and the other person is on another hill shouting, but it's harm, it's a violation of rights, it's dangerous.
They aren't answering the same question.
They aren't even playing the same game, they just happen to be on the same field at the same time.
It's wild that the source material actually gamifies this at the end. It creates a little quiz game to force you to confront these definitions head on.
I thought that was a brilliant rhetorical device because it strips away all the emotion and the history and just forces you to look at the cold, hard logic of each system.
Let's run through it. Question 1. A circumcision is performed without oral suction. Is it a valid ritual?
Answer: no, not according to the strict reading of the Talmud in Shabbat 133b. It fails the checklist.
Question 2. Is the non-therapeutic circumcision of a healthy, non-consenting child acceptable?
Answer: no, not according to the principles of modern medical ethics. It fails the autonomy test.
It's brutal in its simplicity. It just lays the paradox bare. It forces you to realize that you can't just fudge it or find a simple compromise. You have to consciously choose which framework you are prioritizing in a given moment.
And the source material, if we look at the final conclusion it draws from this whole journey, it does make a choice. It lands on one side.
It does. It acknowledges the whole bizarre history. It acknowledges the jerky recipe. It acknowledges the user's confusion. But when it comes to the actual decision about the child,
It sides with the ethics framework. It concludes that under modern standards of care and human rights, the preservation of the child's bodily integrity and their future right to choose must outweigh the demands of a ritual requirement derived from an ancient text.
there's a poem, well, they're presented as song lyrics.
Yeah.
That's included in the final part of the dossier. It's called Two Frameworks, One Act. And it just sums this whole thing up so beautifully.
Can you read the chorus?
The chorus says, one defines a ritual, one asks what we defend. When the child is healthy, ethics draw a clearer line.
Ethics draw a clearer line. That really is the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? When you strip away all the layers of tradition and history and the fear of breaking a chain, and you just look at the vulnerability of the infant in that moment, the ethical line becomes very sharp, very clear.
It has been a wild, wild ride today.
To say the very least, I feel like I have whiplash.
We started with a railway data set, KSPSN02, a string of characters.
Which turned out to be the most boring butterfly you can imagine, flapping its wings and causing an ethical hurricane halfway around the world.
We learned that if you ask an AI about LSJ, you had better be incredibly specific about whether you want 18th century Canadian maple syrup or an international crime scandal.
Context is king. Always.
We learned that young, wild, and chewing trouble is a pretty great slogan for beef jerky, but a truly terrible slogan for a conversation involving ancient deities of child sacrifice.
Yes, and we learned that Mohel and Moloch are only a few letters apart on the page, but they are a whole moral universe away in meaning.
And finally, and I think most importantly, we learned that you can have two perfectly logical, internally consistent systems of thought, in this case Talmudic law and medical ethics, that can look at the same act and come to conclusions that are not just different, but are mutually exclusive.
And that is the lesson that I really hope you, the listener, take away from this. We all walk around with these frameworks in our heads. We all have a set of rules we play by, whether we realize it or not. But sometimes we need to stop and ask ourselves, which rulebook am I actually using right now? And does it still apply to this situation?
Just because an act was considered safety in the 4th century, based on the best knowledge they had then, doesn't mean it's still safety today, based on what we know now.
Exactly. Knowledge evolves. Ethics evolve. And sometimes we have to have the courage to let go of the old framework to protect the living, breathing person who is right in front of us.
That is a very powerful place to leave it, a challenging one, too.
It has to be. These aren't easy questions.
So, a final thought for you to mull over. We've seen how a medical practice from the 4th century, suctioning a wound, is now seen as dangerous. What common medical or health practice do we consider completely normal and safe today that people 500 years from now might look back on with the same horror and disbelief?
That's a great question.
Next time you're reading a debate online or even just talking to a friend, check your lenses. Make sure you know which framework you're looking through.
And maybe double check your acronyms before you hit send.
Always, always double check the acronyms. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
It was a pleasure, as always.